So I've had a lot of messages relating to this news that Joseph Parker has been promoted to #1 ranking by the WBO, and that he has released a 40-second clip calling out Anthony Joshua, who's ranked #2 by the WBO, in order to get that fight moving and decide who the #1 in the WBO is. Firstly, let me start by saying it is absolutely farcical that either man, Parker or Joshua, is rated in the top 2 by the WBO governing body. What makes it even more farcical is the fighters who are ranked below them. So I believe ranks number 3 and 4 are Klitschko and Povetkin. Now, clearly, neither Joshua or Parker have competed at a level where they deserve to be ranked even in the top 10, let alone top 1 and 2. I mean, could you name a top 10 fighter who either guy has beaten? Because for my money, neither of them have come close to beating a top 10 fighter or a top 20 fighter, probably even a top 30 fighter for my money. This is a clear instance for me of favouritism with the governing bodies, where they are promoting these highly publicised prospects because it's seen as good business. You know, I think this is a clear indication of that type of behaviour, and I don't like it, to be honest. But what makes it even more ridiculous is a guy like Alexander Povetkin is ranked behind these prospects. I mean, let's look at who Povetkin's taken on since his loss to Klitschko. Mike Perez, Carlos Takam, Manuel Char, Marius Wok. I mean, these are names far and above the likes of Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker. You know, I like Joshua, I like Parker. They're both excellent prospects, and they can both get there in time. But there is no way they should be rated this high at this stage of their career due to the level of opposition they've been fighting. So that's my first thought. Secondly, I also think it's a ridiculous idea that the two fight at this stage. You know, there's so many big fights out there for both of them. And to be honest, these are both young guys at very early stages of their career. It just doesn't make sense for them to fight right now. You know, I look at Parker, I look at Joshua, I see so much potential. But they wouldn't do themselves justice to have this kind of fight right now, because there's so much that needs to be worked on and ironed out. You know, Joshua, for example, he's never been beyond 7 rounds. To me, he seems to have stamina issues. He seems to have defensive issues. You know, Parker, yeah, he's answered those questions, but he was getting tagged left, right and centre by a journeyman last time out. He had real problems dealing with the southpaw stance of Jason Bergman, who is a low level operator. And for me, that tells me that both guys need more learning fights to build themselves into the fighters that they can be, and to make this fight the super fight that it can be. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not bad that Joshua and Parker have problems with their games at present. They're still very early on in their careers. They shouldn't be the finished articles. They shouldn't be completely refined at this stage. And that's why prospects have 20 fights, 30 fights, and they get tested by well-known journeymen, well-known top 10 operators before they step up to this level. You know, so I think it would be mad to make the fight at this stage. I don't think either guy would be capable of doing themselves justice because they're too early on in their careers and they've still got too much to work on. And whilst it would be an entertaining fight, I think it's a much bigger fight for both guys a year down the line, possibly for a world title. As for Anthony Joshua, I don't think he necessarily needs to worry about the WBO route. He's going to be ranked extremely highly by the IBF route. He's already you know, much more advanced in their rankings, and they've called a final eliminator between Joshua and Takam. And more importantly, Charles Martin is champion for the IBF. That's a much easier fight than the champion for the WBO, which is Tyson Fury. So I think Joshua will be more inclined to go down the IBF route regardless, and kind of ignore the fact that the WBO route is there to him. I think the other thing that maybe people from New Zealand don't have a full perspective on is Anthony Joshua is such a big deal in England, and there's so much money behind him. Anthony Joshua doesn't really need to worry about where he is ranked in the governing bodies, because they have enough money to get voluntary world title shots. I mean, let's look at it this way. Charles Martin is already looking to fight Anthony Joshua for the IBF, because there's so much money in that fight. that Charles Martin is viewing Anthony Joshua as a way to make his millions early on. Similarly, the Joshua-Tyson Fury fight would be so big. Yeah, it would sell 70, 80,000 tickets at Wembley. It would do maybe even 1 million pay-per-view buys in the UK. This fight is so big, there's so much money behind it, that Anthony Joshua is kind of in a very luxury position where he doesn't even really have to worry about positioning himself as the number one in governing bodies. You know, in many ways, it's an unfair playing field, but I know most fighters climb the rankings. Joshua doesn't need to do that. You know, the way the model works in the UK, he's got so much fan interest, so much support and so much money behind him that realistically he can get these titles on voluntaries, because the world champions, the Tyson Furies of this world, the Charles Martins of this world, are going to want to fight him. And what's more, for a voluntary defence, typically it's something like 70% to the champion, 30% to the challenger. A guy like Anthony Joshua doesn't need to go into deals like that. I'm sure with the power of his network, with the power of his pay-per-view sales, he could negotiate at very least a 50-50 split for these world title fights. My point is, he's not even financially incentivised to go down the route of world titles. So I think this whole news that's broken today is a bit of a smokescreen. I really think it's a bit of a smokescreen, because I think the fact that Joshua is rated highly by the WBO is irrelevant to him, because he'd be more likely to go down the IBF route. And I think we need to question whether he needs to go down any route or whether he can just buy in these champions as voluntaries. As for Joseph Parker, he's number one with the WBO. I think that's slightly farcical if you ask me. Parker's a very, very good prospect, but he's done nothing to prove he should be ranked in the top 10, let alone the top 1. You know, he passes the eye test, but he hasn't got the form in the book. He hasn't beaten the level of opposition. It's farcical, and it's rushing Parker to a point he doesn't need to be. Parker is still a baby in the heavyweight division. He hasn't had the right experience. He hasn't fought Tony Thompson. He hasn't fought Malik Scott. He hasn't fought Bryant Jennings. All of those experiences will bring him on so much. But when it gets to his time to really fight for a world title, he'll be a much better fighter for it and have a much higher chance of winning. You know, I see this as a real smokescreen. Now, Parker being WBO number 1, does that mean he'll get a shot at Tyson Fury's belt? Very, very possibly. But I don't see Tyson Fury as a guy who's purely motivated by belts. I think he's going to be more interested in the big fights that are out there. And to be brutally honest, I could see Tyson Fury not taking a fight with Joseph Parker and vacating his belt, because he'd be more inclined to go for the bigger paydays and bigger fights out there. You know, for example, Tyson Fury versus an Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury versus a David Haye is worth so much money in the UK, so much prestige, that, to be honest, it would mean more than having the WBO belt. You know, so I wonder whether Tyson Fury would even be motivated to take mandatories at present. And the other thing to factor in, of course, is he also has the unification route, which obviously surpassed voluntaries. You know, so Tyson Fury is going to potentially look to set up classes with Deontay Wilder, or maybe even Charles Martin, or maybe even the regular title for the WBA route. So he may have excuses not to take these voluntaries. Now, what I hope they do with Joseph Parker is they don't... Yeah, when you've got a person number 1 ranked with a governing body, there's a temptation to sit on them and, you know, not allow them to fight and to protect that place. You know, we've seen that with Lucas Brown, for example, and I think it's been very damaging for Lucas Brown's career. I know it sounds like a strong thing to say, but if I was Joseph Parker, I'd be inclined not to read too much into the WBO number 1 ranking. He still needs to keep active, he needs to keep busy, he needs to raise the level of opposition, and he needs to learn the game and educate himself more with in-ring action to be in a point that he legitimately deserves a world title. Not for the sake that he has to earn it, but so that when he gets there, he can actually go out and win it. Joshua versus Joseph Parker, I don't believe it's going to happen. I believe that fight's a long, long way off. Both guys can focus on their respective routes and maybe meet 2017, 2018. If they both keep winning, it's going to be, you know, a huge, huge money matchup. But right now, there's better options out there for both. There's more money out there for Anthony Joshua, and there's more sensible learning options for both guys. If you've enjoyed this video, give me the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Really appreciate everyone tuning in.